I just wanted to say good evening, everyone. I'm Tanya McGinnis, the director of SAC. I'd like to thank all of you for joining us tonight for our first webinar in the Advanced Education series. Tonight, we're going to hear from Kevin Kiley with Grad School Roadmap as he discusses components of grad school applications. We'll also provide contact information at the end of the session. I'll put my information in the chat and Kevin will have his on his final slide so you can follow up with us for additional information. That's all for me. I will now hand things over to Kevin. Thanks so much.
Outstanding. Thank you so much, Tanya. And thank you for your key role in making this happen. That definitely would not happen without you and with all the commitment from the Service Academy Career Conference. Thank you very much and welcome to everyone. Really looking forward to tonight's presentation, or maybe I should say this morning or this afternoon, depending on what part of the world you're joining us from. We're going to talk today about application components for grad school and also what admissions committees are looking for. As Tanya mentioned, this is all part of a broader effort from SAC with the Advanced Education and Webinar series, which is a very exciting thing. I hope, first of all, that you had a chance to be on the SAC website and see the micro webinars that we recorded as a lead up to these live webinars that we're starting here tonight. We're going to be addressing a number of key topics when it comes to grad school admissions every Wednesday evening from now all the way up to the live admissions fair on October the 6th. And so we've got a number of key topics, the agenda for the presentations, as you can see here. I hope you take time to join us these next Wednesday evenings. And as Tanya mentioned, if by chance you're not, those will be recorded and will be available to you offline or not live, and so that you're able to still take advantage of the information, insight, and resources that are presented in each one of these live webinars. And of course, for more information, obviously, make sure you check out the SAC website, and the URL is right there at the bottom of the slide. So a little bit about me before we kind of go into kind of tonight's presentation and the deep topics. I'm a former MBA admissions director at WashU in St. Louis. There, among other things, I led the recruiting of junior military officers. It's one of the most rewarding things that I did in my time at WashU. I was at the university for a little over 11 total years. And I personally, on the graduate school admissions side of things, have reviewed thousands of applications. After I did that, I went into corporate talent development, did that for more than 5 years. And now I take the insight and the information and the knowledge that I gained in both of those roles as a former admissions director and as someone who worked in corporate talent development, and I do coaching on two parallel tracks. First of all, grad school application coaching through Grad School Roadmap. You can see the URL for our website right there, led by the esteemed Dr. Don Martin. And then also on top of that, I'm also a certified career coach and have my own career consultancy called Career Roadmap. So all these roadmaps we got going on. We got Grad School Roadmap, Career Roadmap, but that's who I am. And you can find out more information about me on either of those websites. And also I'm very big on LinkedIn. I would invite you to join me, to connect with me, I should say, on LinkedIn if you would like. The URL for that will be on the final slide as well. And I'm easy to find there, so it shouldn't be too bad. If you're not on LinkedIn, by the way, yet, you should definitely get on there. But that's all I'll say about LinkedIn for right now. Let's get into the subject matter for tonight. And by the way, I can't emphasize enough, I'm going to try to go through this in a relatively brisk manner so that we get through this content. We get to the Q&A portion. I would invite you to use the Q&A function here in Zoom to submit your questions along the way. And as time allows at the end of our presentation here today, I'll do my best to get to as many of those as I possibly can. Tanya will be helping me with the Q&A. And so we'll get to as many of those as we can at the end. And to me, the content I present here, I think is important, but equally as important are the questions that you have on your mind relative to, again, components of your application for graduate school, and then also what admissions committees are looking for. So 7 components of your grad school application. Let's get into that. So they are basically these: transcripts, standardized tests, maybe. We'll talk about why it's maybe as we get to that section. Finally, a third rather is going to be your resume, CV, your essays, recommendations, interviews, and then scholarship applications, maybe, potentially, perhaps. We're going to go into detail on all of these things in just a moment here, but something to point out that's really important right off the top, and that is that this whole presentation and all of the presentations, in fact, are not going to be unique to any one specific area. In other words, we are not specifically talking about medical school. We're not specifically talking about an MBA. We're not specifically talking about a graduate degree in engineering. We're talking about all of the above. And so we're talking in more general terms. And so what you have to keep in mind is that we'll present this in that manner, but we always have to keep in mind that every school, every program could have its own unique features, its own idiosyncrasies when it comes to the graduate school application process. And so what I'm going to present here and in the subsequent webinars that we have will be generally applicable to pretty much all graduate schools. But please, 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 always double check each program's requirements relative to what you need to do in order to apply. Because as soon as you think you have something down, you'll find some school or some program that has some special requirement or something like that. And if you hadn't double checked the instructions and what was required, you could miss it. And then your application in some cases would not be considered complete. So make sure that you're always checking every school's website on the admissions area to make sure that you're satisfying all the application requirements. Really, really important. Okay, so the first requirement for any graduate program, you're going to have to submit transcripts. So for anything in undergraduate, obviously anything at any of the service academies where you went, any graduate studies that you've already done, and any college level coursework that maybe you've completed somewhere along the way. Maybe you took some while you were in high school, you took some courses at a community college, or maybe since you've graduated, you've taken some online courses. All these things are likely going to be needed to be seen by the schools that you're applying to for graduate study. I know in some cases, an undergraduate transcript or other transcripts will also have information about other schools where you studied. It'll incorporate those into that transcript. Certain programs will accept that and some won't. The point is that if you're going to be applying to graduate study for school, rather, make sure you're on top of what transcripts are needed and which ones aren't, and start that process. I have a lot of individuals who I coach for graduate school admissions these days who have done some sort of study abroad program or some sort of exchange program where they did a semester or even a full year at some other institution. That's great. There are some graduate schools that will actually require you need to get the actual transcript from wherever that is. So if it was in Taiwan or in Spain or in South Africa, you might have to go chase down that transcript. And so anyway, this is something to stay on top of and get taken care of early. Now, when it comes to your transcript, there's a lot of different things that admissions committees could potentially take into consideration when they're considering your case for admission. So your overall GPA is one of those things. Could be your GPA within a specific major, especially if that major is related to your area of graduate study, and overall grade trends over time. This is something we see quite frequently where when people start their undergraduate experience, sometimes they come out the great gate strongly and do wonderfully the whole way. Other times, sometimes the acclimation process to their new environment and their new surroundings takes some time for their past academic track record before they started to catch up to where they are now in undergraduate at university at the academy. And so the point is that they will look. The admissions committees generally will look at grades over time. And so if by chance you started out more slowly, but then did better as time went along, that will generally get noticed. And other things that admissions committees will look for too is the quality of the institution. If you're on this webinar now, you do not have to worry about the quality of the institution, as opposed to some people who went to other places. So I'll just leave it at that. Another thing, final thing I should say, a factor taken into consideration by admissions committees, the relatedness of the past academics to your intended area of graduate study. For example, you might find that if by chance you're interested in a graduate degree in engineering, you may find that some engineering programs will require certain kinds of engineering undergraduate degrees, or at least areas of study in order to qualify academically for that graduate program in engineering. Some may, some may not. Again, you have to check every specific program's requirements because this can differ school to school. And that's just an example with engineering. On the other side, an MBA, I know a lot of people are interested in MBAs these days. It is not the case necessarily that you have to have a certain degree in order to qualify for an MBA. Certain MBA programs may actually require you to have certain courses on your transcript. Okay, I've taken Calc 1, I've taken differential equations, I've taken microeconomics, perhaps. Others may not have any. It just really depends program to program. So please don't come into this thinking that, oh, if I want to get an MBA, I have to have had an undergraduate degree in some area of business. That is simply not accurate. And so again, check the specific schools on that. Okay, second component of grad school application, standardized test, maybe grad school application, standardized test, maybe GRE, GMAT, LSAT, MCAT, whatever it might be, depending on what field of study you're thinking about going into. Find out which is generally required by the schools and by the kinds of programs that you're going to be targeting. Many programs now accept more than one. So, for example, for law degrees now, it has become much more commonplace that law schools are increasingly accepting the GRE as a substitute for the LSAT. This was something that came to the forefront roughly 5 years ago. If you would have told someone in admissions 10 years ago that that would have happened, they would have laughed at you, but this is where we are now. And so make sure that you have an understanding of what is required, if it's required, and if your target schools have certain preferences when it comes to this. And if they don't have any preferences, and if you have an option, look up these different kinds of exams online, find out about what kinds of sections they have on them and what they emphasize and don't emphasize. You'll learn about, they all have different scoring scales as well. So you can learn about what's a good score, what's not a good score. And then take the test that you think you'll do best at relative to your particular strengths along the way. That again is if you have an option and if your target schools don't have an indicated sort of preference. So the reason why I've indicated that standardized tests may be one of your components is that there is a much broader trend right now in higher education away from standardized testing. This is not just at the graduate level, it's also at the undergraduate level. There are a lot of forces at play for this trend. And so this is something that, again, it's something to check into. For the really top schools out there, yes, the standardized test is still something that's going to be around and might be optional, might not. For lesser institutions, it might be they've never required it to begin with, so you don't have to mess with it. But again, this is something that you might have to be thinking about. One of the things that we talk about in graduate admissions is that for every institution, and we'll talk about this a little bit later too, about what admissions committees are looking for. But they're going to need every admissions committee for every graduate program, no matter what area you're talking about. They have to know first and foremost that academically you're going to be able to make it. You're going to be qualified, and you're not going to be an academic liability in their program. And so what they have to go on there are usually your past academic track record and your standardized test result. And so if by chance your past academic track record isn't that great or isn't exempt, it doesn't really represent your potential and on the academic side in a graduate area of study, it may be to your advantage, even if it's optional, to go ahead and take the standardized test. This is a strategic decision. This is part of the coaching that I do with my clients to kind of help them decide, okay, if it is indeed optional, should you still do it? And believe it or not, there are people out there who just, this may sound very foreign to some of you, there are people out there who actually like taking standardized tests. I'm definitely not one of them, but there are certain people who do. And, if that's you and, if you think you'd do well on it and you think it would bolster your case, in an optional setting, it could be worth your while. And it could also be a difference maker when it comes time for scholarship consideration as well. So the point is that standardized tests are still around. In many cases, they're still required, but in many cases they're becoming, I guess the way to say it is, less required. My best advice for you for the standardized test is to look into this, figure it all out, and get this. If you're going to take it, and for the majority of you, I suspect you will, get this completed early in the process. You want to be done with the standardized test when you're actually completing applications. I'm coaching a lot of people right now who are all wonderful people, and I like their chances quite a bit for admission. Some of them are still having to deal with the standardized test, and they are facing application deadlines like right now, like this month or early next month. And it's really tough because the applications themselves, in many cases, you could say, really deserve their full-time focus. And you would hope that the standardized test was behind them. But for various reasons, very defensible in many cases, they just haven't knocked it out. So as best as you can, get this out of the way early. The vast majority, the standardized tests, 5-year shelf life, okay? So it's not as though, if you take it, then it's only applicable for 6 months or something like that. So if you can, try to get this taken care of early, and also knowing what your result was on the standardized test can have a big influence on where you end up applying, because many programs will actually publicize their score ranges, their average scores, their median score, whatever it might be, to kind of give a bit of a profile as to who successful applicants, what those applicants typically score on these standardized tests. And if you are significantly within that, range, or even above, sort of, sometimes they'll publish a middle 80% range or middle 90% range. If you're above that range, that's a preliminary indication that you could be pretty solid. If you're below that, then you might want to rethink your candidacy at that particular place. So again, all the more reason to get this done early. So prepare. There's a lot of different ways you can do it. You can self-prepare. There are self preparation books that are available out there, websites and such. There are test prep courses that they prepare you in all different kinds of ways, whether they actually teach you the materials, or they teach you little tricks to help you beat the test, or whatever it might be. I've heard good things about a lot of them. So it's really kind of up to you as to which one sort of feels like the way that you would be most likely to succeed. And then, of course, as is the case with your entire application process for grad school, create yourself a timeline and back out a study schedule based on that. And oh, by the way, just understand that the standardized test, in almost all cases, it's not a one-time shot. Most programs will consider only your best result. And so, if by chance it doesn't go so well the first time, understand that it's not a one-time shot. You can take it more than once. Okay, the third component of almost every grad school application is going to be a resume or a CV. I would say 98% of grad school applications, you're going to have to prepare either a resume or a CV. Obviously, this is something that presents the elements of your background and that they collectively help you qualify for graduate school. Your military background, professional, academic, and maybe extracurriculars, volunteer work, all those sort of things, other elements, which we'll talk about in just a moment. And so, credentials, accomplishments, activities, skills, all could find a home on a resume or a CV. There are differences between a resume and a CV, which we'll talk about in just a moment. Make sure, this is another example of make sure you're following directions. If a program and part of the application asks for a CV, submit a CV. If they ask for a resume, submit a resume. Don't think that that you can be the exception on that, because most graduate programs, when candidates don't follow directions, their mindset goes to, well, if this person can't follow directions as an applicant, what is it going to be like if they actually matriculate here? So they actually really do pay attention to that stuff. So differences between a resume and a CV. So a resume for grad school usually is going to be one page, occasionally two. That can be really tough to keep it one page. But just remember that a resume is not meant to be a big, long list of everything that you've ever accomplished. It's your highlight reel. It's a movie trailer. It's not the whole thing. It's a focused document. And so again, keep it usually to one page. Occasionally, depending on your amount of experience, it could be two. But for graduate study, usually one page is what we're looking for here. Focuses on professional, military history, academic history. Could have extracurriculars, volunteer work, other sections on there. Resume is obviously used for professional kinds of jobs, and in many cases, it's used for grad school. On the other hand, a CV, usually longer, usually more than 2 pages. This is where the length sort of requirement kind of goes out the window. I wouldn't go more than 5 pages with your CV. Because generally speaking, this is kind of a longer list of, it's a more comprehensive document than the resume is the short way to put it. It has many of the same uses as a resume does, but this is usually going to be found more in the area of sort of like academic jobs, research jobs, scientific sorts of things, academic positions, and that sort of thing. And so just again, the key takeaway here is to just know the differences between the two and make sure that you're submitting what is required. Kind of a side-by-side comparison of the resume sections versus the CV sections. The resume has the things listed here on this particular slide, all the professional summary, maybe a skill summary, that sort of thing. Obviously information about your military service, about any professional background that you have. But then when you get into the CV, you have all of that, but then you're also going to have information about research experience, publications, teaching experience, conferences, poster presentations, professional memberships. I mean, it goes into much greater detail. So just know that if you're charged with putting together a resume for graduate study, it needs to be brief. A CV can definitely be longer, and there are some other subtle differences along the ways too. So some broad tips for whether you're doing either a CV or a resume. Use a common professional font. This is not the time to get all fancy schmancy. Do something very baseline. We're not looking to impress by the design of the resume. In fact, I would encourage you to keep the design fairly simple and consistent. Make sure that, if you're consistently bold facing the same things, or underlining or using italics for the same things. And just make sure you're being consistent with that. Have someone you trust proofread it, look over it, give you feedback on it, not someone who's going to just say, yeah, it looks great, who's actually going to give you some real candid feedback on the document. And then when you do upload that, make sure that you use a nice, clean file name. Nothing long or anything like that, because it just doesn't look as professional as something that's nice, short, and clean. Things to not include on either one of these documents, by the way, an objective statement for those of us who have been in the professional working world for 20 or more years. We remember that an objective statement was this thing we used to put at the top of the resume about what the purpose of this resume is for. Those are no longer done. So would definitely, that's not, it's kind of a gray area. That is, they are not done. Do not have an objective statement on your resume or CV. Private or personal information. A photo of yourself. It's always surprising to me how many resumes I get that when I get a first draft of it, have the person's photo on it. I know that there are templates out there, whether they be in Microsoft Word or in other places online, that have a template, and they have, oh, here's a place where I upload my photo. Okay, photos are a very, very bad idea for resumes and CVs in the United States. In other parts of the world, it is common, and I suspect that that's where these templates kind of come from. It is common, and in fact, in some cases, almost it's like a requirement that on your resume, your CV, you have your photo. Not in the United States. In the United States, there are legal ramifications of that. You do yourself a great disservice by having your photo on your resume or CV. Don't do it. Multiple colored text, anything related to high school, that's out now. It's great that you were, the state champion in tennis, or that, you won mock trial or whatever it was, but that where high school is done. Anything related to high school is out now. Anything reflecting negative upon you. References available upon request is just like that first thing on this list, the objective statement, no longer done. Just don't include that. That is a passe element for a resume or a CV. So. Okay, the fourth element that's going to be in almost all graduate school applications. We're on 4 of 7 here. This is essays, also known as a professional statement, a statement of purpose sometimes. Most applications will require somewhere between 1 and 4 of these, and they come in all shapes and sizes. Some of them will have 4 of them that are all 150 to 200 words. Others will have one that is 1,000 words. And so it just really depends on the program and what they're looking for, and what they like and what they don't like, and what kind of information they want to draw out of you. The essays, I have found in working with candidates for quite some time now, for most applications, this is the part of the applications that takes the most time. Ballpark is 75% of the time. You get your transcripts in, you get your recommendations in, you fill out your name and your contact information and all that. You can knock that out fairly quickly. The essays take people a lot of time. And so as you're kind of budgeting out, what's going to take time on applications, I would urge you to make sure that you're allowing enough time for drafts and rewrites of your essays, because again, this is something that will not only take a lot of time, but also this is a critical component of any application. This can make or break your candidacy. The essays are that part of the application where you go from being a transcript or a resume, where you and your personality sort of come off the page, if you will, in these essays. They really get to know you as a person, as a professional, and get to know better your overall case for why you want to study at that particular graduate program. And they're super important. And in fact, they're so important that the next webinar next Wednesday night is going to be devoted exclusively to this topic, because they're just that important. So I hope you can join me next Wednesday, the 15th, where we're going to go into much more in depth about essay, statement of purpose, professional statement, whatever they call it, and make sure that we go over some best practices for how to tackle these. So that'll be that's up for that right now. Moving on to the 5th element, recommendations. Typically 2 per application. You might find some areas out there that only require 1. You might find some that require 3 or 4. It just really, once again, it depends. You need to check on this early in the process. and make sure that you know what each program's requirements are. As far as what that recommendation is, they may have a grid to fill out where they have to rate you on certain, interpersonal qualities or technical skills or whatever it might be. Or they may actually have to write a freehand, if you will, letter. They may have to do both. And so again, just something to get on top of early. Who should write yours? Usually the schools, the programs will provide some guidance or some indication of what they prefer to see on this, who the best recommenders are. There are certain programs that would suggest that you have nothing but professional references. Some would say one professional and one academic. It just depends. The one thing that we almost never see anymore are personal references. And so, your neighbor who, you're good buddies with, or your fishing buddies, or someone that was, you're in a professional, well, not that, I don't want to go there, but the point is that we were focused on professional recommenders and academic recommenders. Personal ones are just have become a thing of the past as well. And the best recommenders, I'll tell you, admissions committees are not, we're not impressed by title. I say we as if I'm still on an admissions committee. We're just not. What we want to see is on those letters, we want information that is specific and detailed. And we don't want to hear generalities about you. We want specifics. And so where do you get those? You get those from people who have known you long enough and well enough that they can offer specific information about you in the span of these recommendations. So again, not being impressed by titles. I would much rather get a really strong, if you were in the Army or in the Army, I would much rather get a recommendation from a really strong one with specific examples from a major than from a lieutenant colonel. It's all about those specific examples, and can you speak to those specific things within the recommendation itself. Generalities, not a good thing. So again, providing specifics is what we want. And specific examples. Don't just tell me that someone's a great leader, that this person can actually provide an example that, hey, I saw this person, exemplify outstanding leadership skills when she blah, 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 whatever, and tell a brief story about, when he or she saw this candidate actually, portray those specific skills. Again, specifics. Don't speak in generalities. Something that is sort of a red flag almost for most admissions committees is if they do have to fill out a grid, like I mentioned earlier, and they have to rate you on specific things. If someone just rates you, let's just say it's a 1 to 10 scale, and you're rated a 10 the entire on everything. Well, that person, really? You might be, an outstanding candidate, but there's going to be some categories that you will rate not quite as strongly as others. And when you just see that, all 10s or all 5s or all whatever the greatest score is, that shows a lack of understanding of the candidate. So how can you get the way to secure really good recommenders is start this process early. I can tell you again, as a former admissions director myself, something that will, if someone's application is delayed, if someone ends up missing a deadline, or the application is almost completed, but it just is not, and it's just sitting there for weeks, the overwhelming majority of the time, the thing that is holding it up is a recommendation. Because it's you don't have control of when you submit that. Someone else has to do that. And as well-intentioned as they may be, it's not quite the same level of priority as it may be for you. And so start early, make sure you set expectations, talk about deadlines and that sort of thing. Think now about who you might ask, even if you're thinking about grad school, a year or two down the road, and if it's been a while since you've been in touch with that person, maybe it's time to touch base and kind of reestablish ties, because you might be asking that person for recommendations. And oh, by the way, even if you're in an area that usually only requires 2, you may end up needing more than that. Because think about it, if you apply to 7 different places, which is not that high of a number, to be quite candid. A lot of programs, it depends on the program. So, if you're applying for a PhD, you would probably apply to more than that. If you're applying to other areas, you might apply to fewer programs. But my point is that after a while, you can kind of get recommender fatigue, where you're asking this person to submit all these recommendations for you, right? And so it may be, depending on a number of factors, it may be wise to have maybe 3 or 4 people as sort of a bank of recommenders. And then you can you're not overwhelming any one individual with all these recommendations. But again, you can help overcome even that by starting the process early. Finally, you can prepare these individuals, strategically, intentionally for what you would ideally like them to talk about or to discuss or whatever. I would strongly urge you, as you're sort of reconnecting with them, or if you're going to ask them somewhere in the context of that conversation, hey, do a phone call, do a Zoom, sit down over a cup of coffee or lunch or whatever works for you. And, talk about, why you're applying to grad school, give them a copy of your CV, of your resume, talk about your career goals, these sorts of things, because what you want is whatever they're saying in those recommendations, you want that to align with the information that you're providing in the rest of the application, whether that be the essays or the interview or whatever it might be. And so it is completely legal or ethical or whatever you want to say to prepare your recommenders and talk to them so that so that everyone's sort of on the same page. What is not ethical at all is for you to write any part of your recommendations. We hear about this on occasion where someone is asked for a recommendation and they say, yeah, that'd be great, but I'm really busy, so I'll tell you what, why don't you just go ahead and write the letter and then show it to me, and then if I agree with it, I'll sign it, and that'll be that. Don't do that. If you do that and the school finds out about it, the majority of programs, if nothing else, it's a major red flag. And from the overwhelming majority, we're talking about an immediate denial. Don't do that. You can prepare them, but you cannot, the recommendations has to be the original work of the recommender, not you. So resist the urge. Okay, number 6, interviewing. Okay, wow. Not always a requirement. Usually is for the top programs. And in some cases, it may be optional. And so especially if you think that if you happen to feel that you present really well in an interview, maybe you want to go ahead and take that opportunity for an optional interview. In some cases, it may be truly optional. In other cases, the school may not do any interviewing. In some, it may be a requirement before they would actually admit you. Once again, you need to check with each specific program and find out more about what if they interview, and if they do, what their policies are and when that happens. And understand too that in some cases, again, this is important, why you check into these things early, because some programs actually the interview is considered part of your application itself. And if you have to hit a November 15th deadline for your application, that may also include your interview. And if you don't realize that until the 10th of the month, when you've got 5 days before the application deadline, they may not have any interview slots left, and you're looking at basically blowing that deadline. So make sure you know this stuff up front. Much like the essays, the interview is a critically important component of your application, can make or break your candidacy. And once again, because it's just so important, we are going to focus an entire live webinar coming up at the end of this month on just this very topic. And so I hope you can join me for that. We'll talk about how to ace the admissions interview, because just again, speaking as a former admissions director, how many times did we have someone who we reviewed their application on paper, and by we, I mean the admissions committee, we reviewed their application, looked great on paper. Okay, let's bring him or her in for the interview. And we did that. I mean, they basically just needed to do no harm in that interview, and they were probably going to get admitted. And they had a terrible interview. They were rude, arrogant, just not the kind of person we'd want in our program. And the interview basically torpedoed their candidacy. Conversely, we'd have people who were kind of borderline candidates on paper and were very on the fence about, should we even interview this person? We decide to interview them, we bring them in, and they are just absolutely amazing in person, just wonderful. And they go from very on the fence to, we need to definitely admit this person and consider them for scholarship because they are definite strong fit for our program. Interviews are really, really important. And so we'll talk much more about that on the 29th. So finally, scholarship applications, maybe for every program you apply to. The question is there a separate scholarship application? Maybe a certain program considers you for a scholarship basically on the basis of your normal, regular, existing application. Okay, fine. Maybe there's a separate scholarship application or multiple ones. There's all these different fellowship or scholarship programs where you may have actually quite a few to fill out. And if you do have a separate application, what's required? Do you have to do another essay or two? Is there an additional interview? Do you have to provide some sort of financial information? Again, stay on top of this and have this stuff set early. We talked in one of the micro webinars about the importance of staying organized. And this kind of shows that, because again, you're collecting all this information for all the schools you're applying for, and you want to make sure you're on top of this. It's easy to get overwhelmed by all this information coming in from all these programs. And again, the last thing you want to do is to not be on top of something and to get surprised by some requirement when it is too late or it's almost too late. So make sure that you're on top of those things, and to make sure that you accommodate all of that into your timeline for applying and for everything else. Okay, so those are the components of a grad school application. So I hope that this has been a beneficial introduction to each of these 7 things, and I hope that questions are coming into the Q&A as well, because what we're going to do now is transition to how admissions committees, sort of what they're looking for and how they use these components. Now that we know what the components are, we're going to talk about how they use these components to evaluate candidates kind of at a high level. And then after we get done with that, we'll go to your questions, and that'll be it for this evening's webinar. So let's move on here and talk about what admissions committees look for. Hopefully this is something that is comforting to the vast majority of graduate applicants, and that is that admissions committees, generally speaking, take a broad, holistic approach when it comes to evaluating candidates. They really do look at everything. They wouldn't ask for 3 letters of recommendation if they didn't actually want all 3 data points. Okay. And so understand that, it's not in that sort of environment. Don't fall into that. The lure of thinking, oh, it's all about my undergraduate GPA and my LSAT result or something like that. If they ask for something, they're using it as part of your evaluation. Yes, it's true that some parts of an application may be used more prominently when they determine how they make their admissions decisions. And that, again, is a very school specific thing. Sometimes you may find that that information is actually right on the website. They will actually say, the way we make our admissions decisions is, 25% this, 15% this, 10% this, or whatever it might be. Other programs may not actually communicate that information, at least not right there on their website. We talked in one of the micro webinars about the importance of plugging into these programs before you apply and making sure that by the time you actually apply, these programs are familiar with you. They've already started, they know who you are. You've attended an event or two. You've met some of their staff, that sort of thing. And that's also the kind of thing in those information sessions and those coffee chats and all those different things that all these programs have now. In many cases, that's where they will give you some information or maybe even just some hints about what's really important to them. And so it may not be readily available on the website about how they specifically use each one of these components. And in some cases, I just gave a bunch of percentages. In many cases, it's not even that scientific. It's not this percentage, this percentage. It's a holistic, it's more of a sort of an overall feel that the admissions committee makes their recommendations and then a final decision is made. And so the point being is that there's a lot of different ways that admissions committees make decisions. And this is, again, something that I would strongly recommend that as part of your process, you find out how the schools, if you can, how they make admissions decisions and what components they use, perhaps more than others. But overall, most graduate programs are going to be looking for 4 main things. And here they are. Okay, so are you academically qualified? We touched on this earlier. Hey, these are schools, duh. I mean, these are, right? These are academic institutions. They have to know that academically you're going to be able to hack it. And and they have to, otherwise, they probably don't need to go too much further in your application. They will read your application, but if they have no evidence that academically you're qualified, you could be the greatest person in the world and everything else, but you have to be able to make it at their school relative to their academic quality. And so are you academically qualified? They're going to look at any past transcripts. We talked about transcripts as one of the components of your application, and standardized test results. One or both of these need to be, generally speaking, within range or maybe even above range of their typically successful applicants. And you can find out this information. Again, a lot of programs will publicize this information on their website. They don't have it there. A lot of times they will talk about these things in other sort of other areas. Again, coffee chats, YouTube videos, social media. I mean, as long as you're keeping a finger on the pulse and you're looking for this information, many times it can be identified. But again, this is not the only thing. That this is just sort of a preliminary sort of bar to say, okay, is this person academically qualified? Then how well do you know their program and truly want to go there? This comes through in things like your essays, your interviews, where they say, a common essay question: why are you applying to our program? Why do you want to come to the XYZ University of Social Work, or the ABC University or School of Engineering, or whatever it might be? And you could get that question in an interview as well. The question behind the question on something like that is, they want to know how well you know their institution. They want to know how well you know their program. And when you're preparing this essay, for example, if your preparation for the essay was like, oh, I guess I better go check into this program, and you do sort of cruise around their website for 5 or 10 minutes and pick out some of the salient points, and then you work it into an essay, admissions committees will see that from a mile away and know that you haven't put in much time or effort into really knowing their program. And so make sure you take time to really get to know the programs and what distinguishes them, what their unique features are, and that sort of thing. And I would suggest, by the way, that by the time you get to the application itself, I would hope that you would already know that very well, because obviously you selected that school for some reason to apply to. I would hope that you would have very specific reasons already in mind for why you're applying there, as part of your research that we've done, something that we talked about also in one of the micro webinars leading to these live webinars. They also can gauge that information, by the way, from campus visits and other interactions, how well you know their program and truly want to go there. And this gets into a little bit of a kind of a not so well secret about admissions, and that is that your evaluation is not just based on your application. And whether or not the interview is part of your application, I'm not even talking about that. When you are plugging in with these programs as part of the admissions process, not the application process, the admissions process, they're keeping an eye on you. They're observing you. They're evaluating you. They probably have a file on you. And I'm not saying in a weird way or a bad way. They're keeping track of who their really good candidates are. And again, as mentioned in one of the micro webinars, you want your application to not be the first time they've ever heard from you. You want to have established a relationship with some of the people at that program leading up to it, because you can bet that they are keeping track of those interactions. They're documenting things. And if you have made a strong impression on them before you even apply, that will get noticed, that will get documented, and that can help you in the admissions process. And so this is another way that you can demonstrate that you truly know their program and really want to go there. It's not just in the application. There are other ways you can do that as well. A lot of candidates don't know that. I'm sharing that with you right now as a way you can help differentiate yourself. It's not just about the application. You can do it other ways as well. Okay, number 3, are your career goals realistic and are you focused? If you want to, if your career goal is to become an astronaut, don't tell me that, you really want to do that by getting an MBA at my school, because it doesn't make sense. That career goal is not realistic with an MBA, and it doesn't appear that you come across necessarily as focused or you've done an appropriate amount of career research. You have to know why you're doing this. And specifically when it comes to graduate study, we're talking about overall for the 99.9% of graduate students, we're talking about career development and trying to get to a certain place in your career. You have to know how this degree and this program will help you attain whatever that articulated career goal is. Expect to be asked in the application process and in an interview about career goals and why this particular program helps get you closer to those career goals. That comes up again in an interview. It comes to the surface through recommendations, your work experience as seen on your CV or your resume, and in the essays itself. And finally, this is much more sort of a general feel sort of thing, but interpersonally, are you a good fit with the program's culture? Are you likable and a good person to be around? That may sound simplistic, but trust me, admissions committees are definitely looking for that. One of the biggest differences between most undergraduate institutions, and I would say even at the academies, versus graduate areas of study, those graduate areas of study, generally speaking, are smaller. They're much more than most people's experiences at an undergraduate institution, even a smaller one. Graduate study usually is a much even smaller subset of the population. Let's face it, fewer people go and get graduate degrees. And so they're much more closed communities, and admissions committees are much more sensitive in most cases to who they're going to bring into those communities. Because if they have individuals who just are poor fits, are just not good people to be around, that can cause issues, that can cause problems, and admissions committees are very sensitive to that. And so you want to make sure that you are demonstrating that you are fit with that program and its culture, and that you're the kind of person that, when they admit you and then they see you in the hallway in a month or 3 or whatever, they're going to be very welcoming and very happy to see you, that, this is the kind of person we want in our program. A couple other quick things to mention to wrap up this portion before we get to the Q&A. As far as what admissions committees are looking for, again, I know a lot of people are looking for MBAs. This is something that admissions committees on that side are definitely going to be looking at. What is your potential as a business leader? MBA programs are in the business of training current and future business leaders. They're much more interested in your leadership skills, your leadership potential, than perhaps, say, for example, technical skills and that sort of thing. So they want to know what is your potential as a business leader. That will definitely come through in recommendations and in interview essays and in your work experience up until now. And when I say work experience, by the way, that can mean military experience as well. Do you have a progression of continued level of responsibility, increased responsibility, and success in each successive role? You haven't leveled off. You've actually continued to have increased responsibility and successes in those areas, demonstrating that you are ready for more responsibility, more leadership. That is something that MBA programs are definitely going to be looking at. And then finally, for those of you who might be looking in master's and other doctoral programs, it could be the case that they're interested in knowing about your research interests, about any teaching work that you may have done. That could be part of their evaluation. In other areas, that is not important at all. Again, you have to check into each specific program, each specific school, about what they value and what they don't value when it comes to these things. But those are the things that admissions committees are going to be looking for. And so you can kind of see how the components of the application that we talked about in the early part of our webinar are actually used by the admissions committees to make these kinds of evaluations on applicants and bring together a strong class, no matter what area of graduate study it's going to be, whether it's, again, medical school or law school, business school, engineering, whatever it might be. Again, certain programs, certain schools may have their own nuances to this, but generally speaking, these are the kinds of things that they're going to be looking for. And so you want to make sure that your applications showcase these things in a really sharp and strong way, so that you become a much more likely candidate to be admitted. Okay, that wraps up the presentation for today. Thank you for your kind attention. I sure appreciate it. Looks like we do have some time for Q&A. I'm happy about that. But before I turn it over to Tanya to lead us through that, let me mention again, I hope you're able to join us next Wednesday, the same time, 7 to 8 p.m. Eastern time in the US. We talked a little bit earlier about the importance of those essays and personal statements, and that's going to be the full focus of our next webinar on Wednesday the 15th. So hope you can join me there. And just remember that we'll have these live webinars every Wednesday from now until October the 6th, which after that live webinar, we'll have the live virtual admissions fair featuring university representatives that Tanya has been working hard on, and we're all looking forward to. And this is a chance for you to get to know admissions representatives from various programs, and to continue this process of pursuing graduate study. My email address is right there as well. Please feel free to reach out to me. And as I mentioned, feel free to connect with me on LinkedIn as well. I'm grateful for the time to spend with you this evening, and I'm looking forward to your questions. Tanya?
We do have some questions. One from Michael is, I'm within the 80% range for my target school, but on the lower end. What things can I do if I can't get my score up to improve my case for academic readiness?
Sure. So I'm by middle 80%, I'm assuming you're talking about standardized tests there, whether the GMAT or the GRE. If the first assumption is that the score can't increase anymore, and in some cases that may be the case. I remember from my time as an admissions director, we would see sometimes that people would take a standardized test, 6 or 7 or 8 times, and you can definitely. There is a track record usually of people improving their score on the standardized test if they take it a second or even a third time, but you do start to see diminishing returns when you get to the 4th or 5th or 6th time. And so first of all, I know it was just a brief Q&A, and Michael, thank you for the question. I just would want to double check that in fact, that, when you say that the score is not going anywhere, you don't think you're going to increase it, that you've truly exhausted all, avenues on that. So for example, I have some individuals who, they take a test 3 times, and their study habits and their study methodology is the same all 3, and their score kind of doesn't go anywhere. And then, we talk about, well, maybe you need to change your approach to studying. And so then they get into a group with a tutor and that sort of thing. And they do that for a month or 6 weeks or something like that. And then they see a substantial jump in their score. And so again, I would preface all this by saying, just make sure that when you say that you're pretty sure your score is where it is, that you've exhausted all options there. Because again, you can take the test multiple times. And again, most programs will only take your best score. That having been said, if it is what it is and it's not going anywhere, and by the way, I myself was terrible at standardized tests. So I'm not saying that you're terrible at standardized tests, Michael. I'm saying that I was terrible. So I feel your pain. The way you can further academically demonstrate your readiness is to actually take courses in related areas to where you're going to be pursuing graduate studies. So for example, we'll use an MBA, because again, my sense is that a lot of people are interested in MBAs, but this would apply to, kind of across the board. Go to your local community college, go to some online program, go somewhere and take a course in accounting, finance, microeconomics, quantitative analysis, statistics, anything like that would be related to that area of study, that maybe your grades from undergraduate weren't so hot, or that maybe you never took before, and demonstrate your academic readiness that way. We'll talk in the webinar next Wednesday about most graduate programs having an optional essay where you can talk about, sort of any area that you may not have as strong as a track record on. And if you actually do use that optional essay, you can say, hey, my past academic track record or my standardized test result is not reflective of my ability in your program. And as evidence that I am academically ready to go, here are 3 or 4 courses that I've recently taken either online or at a local community college, and all related to whatever area that I'm applying for now. And I've I've got A's in all of these courses. That's the kind of standard go-to way to do that. If it's not the standardized test, take some courses that show your academic readiness that way. It's not as strong, it's not as good as having a really good undergraduate GPA. It's not as good as having as good standardized test result, but it's better than not doing anything.
All right, next question is from Leslie. Is it better to submit your application early? My spring application is due mid-December, but the program starts reviewing applications in September.
Okay, good. Love the question, Leslie. Thank you for that. So the best time for anyone to apply is when you have the best possible, strongest application ready to go. I would if a program has 2 application deadlines, just as a for instance, I would much rather see a strong round 2 application than an okay round 1. Is just because it works so much more in your favor to wait and to submit the best possible application. In doing so, usually not only do you give your recommenders more time, but you also greatly eliminate the potential for inadvertent mistakes, typos, or things submitted to wrong schools, or all different. There's a number of different mistakes that unfortunately can get made when we rush applications. And in some cases, getting back to Michael's questions, if by targeting a later deadline, you actually may have time to take a standardized test in additional time and bring your score up. And so I appreciate the question very much, but I would definitely, and I appreciate one. Yes, in many cases, there's sort of this belief that you should apply as early as you can. And generally speaking, that is accurate. But above and beyond that, by leaps and bounds, is the best time to apply is when you have a really strong, really good application ready to go. It's not, don't rush for round 1 and sacrifice what would have been a really good application for round 2. That really good application for round 2 is the better way to go. Love that question. Thanks, Leslie.
All right, we have 4 more questions.
Okay.
Tom asks, how do fit reps and rankings amongst your peers factor into the application process, if at all?
How do what?
Fit reps
fit reps. I don't know what, I'm sorry, what is I apologize, I'm not, what is a fit rep? I don't know what that is.
That is a fitness report.
Oh, fitness report. Okay. Okay. That would make sense. And then class ranking. Not much at all, especially coming from one of the service academies. Because again, I mean, think about this gets into the question of the quality of the institution. Okay. And so, would you rather, if your first day in graduate school, you come into that first class and you sit down and you've got a person sitting to your left and to your right. And okay, and you say, well, you start, and people are, having those conversations, they're kind of feeling each other out, so to speak, and they're kind of learning about people's backgrounds and stuff like that. And on one side of you, you've got someone who graduated with, let's just number out of thin air, a 2.9 undergraduate GPA, and was ranked in the lower third of his class at, pick your favorite tier 1 institution, Harvard, Stanford, something like that. And you've got that person sitting on one side of you. And on the other side of you, you've got someone who went to a school that almost nobody's ever heard of, whatever. It's just the quality, it's not a strong academic institution. It doesn't have a good reputation. People haven't heard of it, all these different things. And that person had a 4.0 in that particular institution and was ranked number 2 in their class. Which of those two people are you more excited about as having a classmate? And the point of this illustration is to say that it's not just about the pure numbers. The quality of the institution is a factor, and it's something that admissions committees do take into account. And so, someone who is ranked in this lower quarter, lower third, lower half of a really good program, a really good institution, still got into that institution and still graduated, right? And so that's important to consider. And so quality of institution is a very real consideration. Thanks, Tom.
Andrew had a follow-up question to that question. He says, I believe the question is geared at rankings among commissioned officers, i.e. out of a group of 5 O3s, this was the number 1.
Yeah, I would not be concerned about that relative to your graduate application.
Okay. An anonymous attendee is asking, if a school requests an academic recommendation, but you're 5+ years removed from your last college academic courses, is it possible or common to substitute that recommendation for another professional recommendation?
The short answer to your question is no. Again, hugely important as part of the application process is to follow directions. And, there are occasionally exceptions to this. And so talking about who your recommenders are, I'll give you an example. Often for certain programs, as one of the professional references, they want to hear from your current supervisor at work. And it is often the case that depending on when you're applying, that your current supervisor isn't aware of your plans to resign and go to graduate school, especially if you're talking about a full-time program where, you go and do that. And so for that reason, it's simply not possible to have that. And most graduate programs understand this, but usually it's something that you would want to explain somewhere in the application. Typically in that optional essay is a great place to do that. And so, and then what you would do in that case is, okay, so I don't have my current supervisor, but I have a supervisor from the job that I had before this, who, sort of knows you with the same perspective, and you're able to do that. So getting back to the question submitted, if a program indicates a strong preference for an academic reference, I would not encourage you to submit who you want. I would encourage you to submit what they want. And if it's been a long time since you have had interaction with an academic person who could, serve as that reference, I would suggest two things to do. One is to, reconnect with people, use LinkedIn, use a university's website, use whatever at the academy, whatever resources you have, and get back into it and, reintroduce yourself to that person. Sometimes and that happens a lot, more than some people I think understand. And then and it happens, and professors are generally pretty understanding of that, so you haven't reached out in 7 or 8 years. Well, you know what, neither have they. But now it's like, hey, you're reconnecting, you're thinking about graduate studies, something like that. Again, all the more reason to sort of engage in that process earlier rather than later. And make sure that you're having those conversations. If you do reach out to those individuals like that and you don't hear back, I mean, again, the worst thing you do is unfortunately, you don't hear back. Okay. And then if all those avenues are completely exhausted, we get back to our earlier question, and that is where you go take some courses somewhere, and really apply yourself. Make sure you, forgive the term, make friends with that professor. And then at the end of the experience, after you get your A in that class, ask that individual for an academic reference. Go above and beyond on the course, do really well, and now you have a current academic reference to use as part of your graduate application.
All right, we've got 3 questions left.
Okay.
These are really good ones.
Oh boy,
Philip
good. I can't wait.
Philip is asking, could you please describe more of the behaviors of successful interview candidates?
Of successful interviewed candidates?
Mm-hmm.
Well, I could, but we would be taken away from the webinar on the 29th. So I appreciate the question. I'll give you a couple things. Well, I think that, and again, this will all come up on the 29th. Let's call this a sneak peek of that particular one. I can tell you where applicants get themselves into trouble in interviews, and this is we'll talk about this, but graduate programs are seeking to admit human beings, real people, not robots. And people get themselves into trouble in graduate interviews when they don't act like the best version of their professional self as they possibly can. The short way of saying that is be yourself. Stop trying to be like someone who you think the admissions committee needs to see or wants to see, or this idea that some of us have of like who their ideal candidate is. Yes, you want to be professional, but at the same time, smile, relax, make a lighthearted comment, that sort of thing. Talk about, the things that are, be prepared for small talk, these sorts of things, that sort of thing. If they want to get to know you as a person because they're talking about bringing you into their community, usually fairly small, closed communities, and they want to know a little bit about your interpersonal skills, not just about your past academics and your career to date and your career goals, that they're looking to sort of gauge you in a comprehensive manner. Be yourself, relax, reveal your personality, and to sort of let it flow in that regard. Other than that, we'll talk much more about that a few Wednesdays from now.
All right. Tom is asking, how do you translate work experience in classified programs or the intelligence community onto your resume and essays?
Yeah, I mean, so I would probably need to talk with you a little bit more specifically about that, Tom, as far as what can and cannot be revealed in that sort of circumstances. The quality, when it comes to work experience, there are two things that admissions committees are going to be looking for, generally speaking: quantity and quality. And so the quality of work experience, that usually lends itself to providing details about the specifics about, what your roles, what your responsibilities are. And it's the case, I've worked with individuals, not necessarily, I've worked with a lot of individuals with military backgrounds, but as another example, people who work in the defense industry. They work for the Raytheons, the Boeings, the Lockheed Martins of the world, and they work, they have, security clearance, top secret, whatever it might be. And there are certain things that they just can't, and then they generally, and they know their programs and they know what they can and cannot discuss much better than I do. And so what we end up doing is sort of working through that and saying what is able to be said. But also sometimes it's just as simple as acknowledging on, a resume or on a CV that, part of my work at wherever this was, or at this particular branch or in this unit or whatever it was, what it had to do with classified things, and you just can't go into greater detail. And then hopefully the quantity of work experience is then captured on the resume or the CV as well, simply by your tenure there, the number of years or months that you were in that particular role. All
right, and the last question comes from Kevin.
Oh, good name.
How is a senior work college with a pass-fail transcript viewed for an EMBA program?
Okay, oh wow, that's a great question. So EMBA programs specifically, generally speaking, are for individuals who have been out of college, out of undergraduate, that sort of thing, It depends on the institution, but usually it's at least 5 years, but usually it's closer to like 10 or 15 years. For executive MBA programs, yes, they care about your your past academic track record. But the good news is that it's less important because it's further back in your history. In other words, who you were, who any of us were 10 or 15 years ago, probably is pretty different than who we are today. At least I hope so. For the majority of us, hopefully we've grown and we're more mature and we've learned a lot of things and we're just wiser and more intelligent, right? And so your past academic track record for an executive MBA program or EMBA program is going to be important, but it's going to be less important if you were someone who was applying to graduate study, 5 years after graduating. And so a pass fail is probably, well, it's not as optimal as letter grades. But that having been said, something that has come up actually relative to what the unfortunate circumstances of COVID, a lot of institutions have gone to a pass-fail metric much more commonly as part of COVID. And as a result, something we saw this past graduate admission cycle is graduate programs becoming increasingly comfortable with that nomenclature, if you will. Obviously, they're familiar with it since they're universities, but once upon a time, a lot of pass-fail courses might have been viewed in a negative light. I would tell you now that overall, they're going to be viewed overall in sort of a more neutral light. And for someone, Kevin, who's interested in an executive MBA program, I think you have less to be concerned about in this area. Any others, Tanya?
And that is the end of the questions.
Okay.
Thank you, Kevin, so much for this great information, and to all of our attendees. We look forward to seeing you here again next week, same time, same place, and we'll cover another topic that is incredibly important to
Wonderful.
your advanced education, application essays and personal statements. Mm-hmm. And so if you have any questions, again, feel free to send an email. We will get back in touch with you just as soon as we can. And this recording will be available to you on Friday. Thanks again.
Awesome. Thanks, Tanya.
Have
Thanks,
a great
everyone.
night.